So bad. Yes. What do you want to read? Noah, yeah? Yeah, okay. What's your name?
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. I'd like to invite Muhammad to come upstairs to the stage and recite the Quran Tilawat, please.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد.
صلوات.
Allahumma
صل على محمد وعلى Hassan, mashallah. I'd like to invite Muhammad Hassan to come off the stage to recite the Noah for us, please. Thank you.
صلوات.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala
شمع سے شمع جلے سلسلہ جاری رہے ہم رہے یا نہ رہے یہ عزاداری رہے شمع سے شمع جلے سلسلہ جاری رہے ہم رہے یا نہ رہے یہ عزاداری رہے شمع سے شمع جلے اپنی نسلوں کو سکھاتے رہو ماتم کا ہنر سینہ در سینہ کرے بس یہ عزاداری سفر جیسے حالات بے ہو یہ عمل جاری رہے ہم رہے یا نہ رہے یہ عزاداری رہے شمع سے شمع جلے سلسلہ جاری رہے ہم رہے یا نہ رہے یہ عزاداری رہے شمع سے شمع جلے لا کے بدلے یہ زمانے کی روش اور موسم ایک پل بھی نہ رکے اشک رضا اور ماتم ماتم شہر کا جنون ذہن پر طاری رہے ہم رہے یا نہ رہے یہ آزاداری رہے شمع سے شمع جلے سلسلہ جاری رہے ہم رہے یا نہ رہے یہ آزاداری رہے شمع سے شمع جلے تم اگر ذاکر شبی ہو یہ یاد رہے چاہے اس غم کے لیے سلگی کٹے کر بھی چلے حرمت فرش ازا جان سے پیاری رہے ہم رہے یا نہ رہے یہ آزاداری رہے شمع سے شمع جلے سلسلہ جاری رہے ہم رہے یا نہ رہے یہ آزاداری رہے شمع سے شمع جلے صلوات
اللهم صل على محمد.
MashaAllah. Okay, before I invite Syed Ahmer Shah to the stage, just a reminder, if you can sit far forward, can you make yourselves move forward, please? So people don't disturb the lecture later on with the loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali. So, inshallah, I hope you're enjoying the lectures so far from Syed Ahmer. He's done, mashallah, a wonderful job. We're going to have a question and answer sessions on Friday night and Saturday night after the program, after marking, etc. in the hall. If you'd like to get some questions ready, if you write them down, and we can hand them to Syed Ahmer Shah, and he can read them and answer your questions, etc. So yeah, and as well, a reminder, just if you want to recite at any point, just let yourself known to me, and then we can arrange a time, whether that's a Noah or Qasida or Ziyarat, etc. as well. So I'd like to welcome Syed Ahmer Shah to the stage now, please, with a loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali.
نعرہ تکبیر اللہ نعرہ تکبیر اللہ نعرہ رسالت یا رسول اللہ نعرہ رسالت یا رسول نعرہ حیدری حیدری نعرہ صلوات
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وشفيع ذنوبنا سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد
اللهم صل على محمد
وآل الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا ولعنة الله دائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في القرآن الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ونزلنا عليك الكتاب تبيانا لكل شيء صدق الله العلي العظيم أما بعد السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. So the discussion we are continuing with, which we began from our first lecture, was the Islamic worldview and how Islam wants to orientate the human being towards the divine presence and awaken the human being to the potentials which are latent within the human being. And by that, the Quran plays a very, very central role, because the Quran is the communication of God to human beings, right? And within Islam, we formulate our worldview and how we see things, how we vision society, how we vision our beginning, and how we see our end through the lens of the Quran. And in terms of forming this vision of the Quran, it is important to understand how central a role the Quran plays within our thinking, and how sometimes the Quran takes a back seat, and we begin to become not centralize the Quran within our thinking as religious people. We may move to other sort of parts of religion, marginal aspects, peripheral aspects, and make those aspects more central than the most basic thing within our religion, which is the Quran. Now, why is that? Because, and it shouldn't be the case, because when we look at the Quran, every Muslim sect, every group said the Quran is an unchanging miracle revealed to the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? But when it comes to other aspects of Islamic history, the hadith, there are so many, and every individual here knows that you are arguing with the other sect, or you are arguing amongst yourselves about this particular hadith or that particular hadith. But when it comes to the Quran, no one person can deny a verse of the Quran. No individual from the Muslim world can say, oh, this is not a verse of the Quran, or this has this background, and this narrator is not a good narrator. Because we know that the Quran is revealed as a miracle, and it was revealed as a final revelation. And in order to understand it as the final revelation, and as something which is there to intellectually challenge human beings right until the end of times, it is important to consider what came before it. We see at the time of the Prophet Musa alayhi salam, sorcery was very powerful, magic was very powerful. And there we see Musa alayhi salam bring about certain miracles, miracles relating to the staff, miracles relating to the staff becoming a serpent, the splitting of the Nile, and his hand going into his sleeve or into his pocket and coming out white, the Yad Bayda. And we see also the miracles which occurred at the time of Isa alayhi salam, where the knowledge of medicine was at its peak according to the time. So the miracles wrought by Sayyidina Masih alayhi salam, or Isa, were related to his ability to cure the leper, to even bring back people to life, to cure the blind. And there we see that he was able to do those miracles and completely confuse the individuals. And they say that this is definitely a divine act, and which brought about his verification as a prophet. Coming towards the Quran and our prophet, we see that the prophet did perform certain miracles. The shaqqul qamar, the splitting of the moon, the dancing or the recital of the kalima, the shahada by the stones, and various other miracles when he was born. But the greatest miracle of the prophet is the Quran, right? Now, why is it the greatest miracle? When we have to look at the nature of what a miracle is. A miracle is not khariqul aql, i.e. does not defy intellect and reason. What a miracle does, it defies the natural course of events. It is khariqul ada. So, for example, the serpent, that's when Musa alayhi salam threw the staff and it became a serpent. Now that may at first sight look like it's defying the intellect. It's saying reason cannot understand this at all. But in reality, it is not defying the intellect or reason. It is defying the natural course of events. Because if you look at a staff, a stick, if it was to become decay and become organic matter, that organic matter could then take on other properties according to nature, and the bonds are then reorganized, and that staff then slowly, after going through a variety of causes and effects, become a serpent. right? After a long time, through a variety of different chain reactions, causes and events, causes and effects, it becomes a serpent. What happens at that particular time, there's some invincible cause, some hand within that chain of events that speeds everything up. It's like a catalyst, right? And you could call it the divine hand or some sort of cause which speeds up those reactions and leaves it to become a serpent. But it's not defying the intellect, because there is some sort of cause and effect still going on. The relationship, the necessity of when something burns, there will be fire. When something happens, A happens, B will happen. That is still actually still there. Similarly, when it comes to the Quran, the miracle that the Prophet had to give could not be limited to time and place. The miracle could not be limited to a certain field of human knowledge. The miracle could not be limited to a certain group of people. The miracle could not be limited to a certain particularity or a certain constitution of human beings, elites, for example, philosophers. It couldn't be limited to just your average person. The miracle had to be all comprehensive, and the miracle had to be universal, to the extent that the miracle that the Prophet brought had to be not only remain within Arabia, it has to be a miracle for every age right until the day of Qiyamah, right? And in that sense, we're talking that when humans reach such a futuristic level, they may be living on Mars, they may not even be living in the way we live, they may be living in a totally new, socially engineered environment. Even at that stage, the Quran will be a miraculous thing for them. Why? Because we live in an age, or from the time the Quran was revealed to the Prophet, it was revealed as an intellectual miracle. It was not revealed as a miracle which is something which just suddenly makes you go, wow, and shocks you. This is something which speaks to the human condition. And it speaks to the human mind more than anything. I mean, put it this way, we see people now claim there's so many miracles occurring. We use the word miracle very, very easily and say, oh, this is a miracle, that's a miracle. I saw the name of the Prophet on a piece of fruit, or I see the name of Mawla Ali on the moon, or I see some redness coming out of a stone or on something, and wow, it's a miracle. It's awoken me up. Maybe it may have a very short-lived effect and propriety, i.e. its sort of effectiveness. But the dose that the Quran gives you, when it says تِبْيَانًا لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ, when the Quran is a medicine, it is a remedy. It contains tibyan. It contains everything for everything, right? In that sense, a short-lived miracle, what you might call something occurring which is not something you're used to, it may just last for a short time, or it may last for a week, 2 weeks, 3. Anyhow, that sort of effect will wear off at some point. The effect of that will wear off. But with the Quran, the miracle and the miraculous nature of it is that its effect never wears off, because it challenges the deepest conscience of human beings. It challenges their intellect. And human beings essentially are intellectual beings, beings which have the ability to reason, the ability to think, the ability to deduce facts, the ability to transcend and go beyond their body and physical limitations and become godly, become liberated. And here, if we look at the Quran and we look at how the Quran compares to the Bible, or it compares to the Jewish scriptures. And regarding this, we have a word called Orientalism. Orientalism is a project which took place, not so much as with force nowadays, and it's pretty much withered, but it's a project which took place in the turn of the 19th century. And it was very much linked to colonialism, when a lot of the Muslim world was being occupied by the British, primarily, Europeans as well, the Dutch and others, but primarily the British. And it was a project to understand the other religion, and they used intelligent people, of course, people who were gifted with knowledge and degrees from universities and things, and they were used as intelligence officers by the colonial powers to go into the lands, the newly conquered exotic lands, and this exotic, new, weird other religion they were coming to face with, and to disprove the religion, to totally disprove it and say, this is not a product of revelation. 1400 years ago or 1300 years at the time, there was no revelation. There was nothing that came outside and God's hand came into history and you produced this Quran and this miracle. What was produced was just a product of what was already there. So we see in Arabia, the biblical literature, the Jewish literature, there were Jewish tribes, there were Christian tribes, and they all had, of course, some sort of dealings with the Arabs, and the Prophet must have interacted with them and produced this wonderful book called the Quran, right? And when they read it, they did not say it's miraculous or it's actually the word of God. It's just part of that previous heritage. And this was the project of Orientalism, to make the Quran seem like just a historical book. A book which does not really have, it has some sort of value historically. It will tell you about how the Arabs were at the time, the mind of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and the way, what allowed him to create such a powerful force in Arabia and unite the warring Arab tribes and rather backward Arabs and Bedouins, and make them the greatest and one of the greatest civilizations that's ever existed. Right? So that was the Orientalist project, to look at the Quran as a purely historical aspect. And unfortunately, a lot of Muslims got caught up in it to a certain extent, because they started to then try and challenge this Orientalist view, this view that the Quran is not the word of God. It is just a combination of factors and knowledge and understanding that was rife at the time of the Prophet, and he utilized all this to suddenly start looking at scientific aspects of the Quran. So Sir Syed Ahmed Khan in Aligarh in India, Saeed Nursi in Turkey, and another individual whose name I can't remember in Egypt. But these groups of people with sincere efforts to try and prove the Quran, and even today, people have read the books of Harun Yahya, who was quite famous at the time, but now he's obviously fallen out of favor and anyhow. But to say that the Quran is like a scientific book, there are so many scientific miracles in the Quran. The Quran conforms to science. Tafsir al-ilmi it's called. But one of the biggest flaws in this, because what I want to today say is the Quran is universal, right? And to limit it to like saying it's a scientific textbook would mean that it has to always confirm a scientific theory. So whatever the scientific theory is at the time, Copernican theory might have existed at the time of a certain person who was interpreting the Quran. Copernican meaning that the earth is flat, etc. And then of course we discovered that the earth is round, that it's spherical. And then there was the idea of that everything revolves around the earth, the geocentric model, right, in science, that the earth is the center of the universe and all the planets and everything go around the earth. Then scientific theory started to jump and change, and it changed to the heliocentric model, that actually no, the solar system consists of the sun as the center, and then around it you have the orbit of various planets, right? And then after that we have a shift in the idea of the physical world, shift in how we look at the way the physical world is. And you probably can now catch on that if the Quran is confirming one theory 500 years ago, and then 100 years later a new theory comes out, hang on, the Quran is actually not true now, because you are limiting it to the context of certain ideas which are the product of human mind. Science is, and it's a very, very venerable sort of pursuit. It's a very noble pursuit of knowledge. It's a certain way of getting knowledge. It's not the only way of getting knowledge, because when we speak about knowledge later on, there are so many other ways. But getting back to the point is that as each time period started to change, we have different scientific models. Newtonian physics, which has pretty much been replaced, a lot of it has been replaced by the theories of relativity from Einstein and the quantum theory, right? So, in a nutshell, on this particular point, the Quran is not only a scientific book, because scientific theories continuously change. And to always join the Quran according to the fad of the time is a great sort of, shall we say, injustice to the Quran. Whatever the fad is now, we have to say, oh, shall we say that we have to now suddenly reinterpret every single verse and the way we look at the Quran according to the fad of today's day? Like in schools, we see that there's gender fluidity. In every form you fill in, now they ask you whether you're a male, female, non-specified or non-binary, etc., etc. Or when it comes to other aspects of human interactions, which the Quran does not endorse, but because it becomes a fad of the time and it becomes in vogue during the time, should we endorse it? And then some biologists might tell us, oh, actually it occurs in the realm of animals, so should we endorse that? So that is another aspect of the Quran. The Quran is not necessarily a scientific book, but at the same time, it isn't even a linguistic text. Although one of the greatest aspects of the Quran, and like the verse says, قُلْ إِن كُنْتُمْ فِي رَيْبٍ مِّمَّا نَزَّلْنَا عَلَىٰ عَبْدِنَا فَأْتُوا بِسُورَةٍ مِّن مِثْلِهِ وَادْعُوا شُهَدَاءَكُمْ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ إِن كُنْتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. That the Quran says the challenge that it set up against all the pagans of the Quraysh and of Bedouin Arabia was that if you claim that you are truthful, and see how the words of the Quran are here, it's not saying, hang on, this is the Quran, that's it. It is saying if you claim, if you say so, if you believe you have truth with you, that you are sadiqeen, that you are truthful and veracious and you have facts and evidence, then bring your evidence, i.e. bring a surah according to this verse, according similar, not exactly the same, but just something even similar, remotely similar to this Quran, and say that if you are truthful, can you bring this verse? And now here's a question. That in Arabia, we spoke about that at the time of Isa alayhi salam, there was medical knowledge was at its peak. We said that at the time of Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam, knowledge of magic and sorcery and the ability to subjugate nature was at its peak. But at the time of the Prophet, linguistic, poetry, language, all these skills were at their peak. The Arabs would compose very, very long qasidas, poetry, not the qasida we know of in Urdu, but qasidas which were pages and pages long, and they would memorize them. Imrul Qais, the Sab'a Mu'allaqat, which are very, very famous poems, they used to be hung on the Kaaba, and they used to have these competitions of poetry. The poems used to rhyme very beautifully. The poems used to have beautiful symmetry, and they would fulfill a lot of the rules of rhetoric, and the finery of delicate thoughts would be found within them. You know, very, very delicate ideas. Do you think these people who were so good at language, so good at producing poetry, so good at producing ideas and fine thought with words, could not bring a verse of the same, of the Quran? This is one of the greatest aspects of the Quran, just on a superficial level. We're not even getting into the depths of the Quran. We're not getting into its metaphysical, spiritual, philosophical, theological, ethical, legal dimensions. Just by simply looking at the dimensions of the Quran, which are face value, superficial. Like Mullah Sadra says, that when in a verse when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that we send the rizq from the sky, he says that some people, the cattle, the animals, the things that graze, the birds and stuff take part of that rizq, whatever it is. And then you see the insects and the animals and everything else take that rizq, and the earth take its rizq accordingly. But then the human being, because of his higher capacities, is able to extract oils from that, is able to make fine food from that, is able to take greater benefit from that. And similarly with this Quran, that it is a metaphor for the fact that you could take so much from it that if you were to just live like simple, superficial level, you'll just be so absorbed in its language, in its sarf, in its nahw, in its balagha, i.e. the sciences which relate to language, which is syntax, morphology, rhetoric. But you will never go beyond that, and we sometimes find that within, not so much within our school of thought, but we definitely see that there is more of an emphasis on the actual word and the literalness of the Quran in other groups. But like I was saying, that when we look at this Quran, it is not only a scientific miracle, it is not only a legal text even, that we say, oh, from the Quran we get all our legal. If you actually look at it, there are only 500 verses from 6,666 verses and 114 surahs that relate to laws. Surah Al-Baqarah contains a lot of legal verses. You have the surah of Nisa, women, which has a lot of laws in it, Surah Al-Tawbah, Surah Al-Hajj, and then dispersed in various other verses or surahs, there are verses relating to law. So the question here is, what actually is the Quran? The Quran is a very much a universal text, and it actually represents all the potentialities and all the multiple dimensions of the reality outside within the book. Whatever we see outside, we see so much multiplicity, so much difference, so many different ideas, so many thoughts, so many interpretations, so many people having so many. That's why we find people that are able to say that if they want to prove evolution, they'll look at the Quran. If they want to prove Marxism, they'll look at the Quran. If they want to prove, even we see the most fundamentalist, the most extreme ideologies, where do they go? They go to verses of the Quran to try and prove themselves, right? We find that it is the big debate over the verses of the Quran, which sometimes within the different sects of Islam even. But in here lies the beauty of the Quran also. Why is that? Because the Quran does not mention specific names apart from prehistory. Although it does mention certain names at the time of the Prophet, like it mentions, of course, Abu Lahab, it mentions Zayd, it mentions Zainab bin Jahsh, the wife of the Prophet. But as far as specific names are, other than that, it does not mention any names at the time of the Prophet as much. Whereas pre-history of the Quran, prior to the Quran being revealed, the names of all those prophets and individuals are mentioned. And it goes to show this is a continuity. It starts from Adam all the way to the Prophet, a continuity of guidance. And that's why within the Quran, when I say it is universal, there is never the plural word of being used within the Quran. Inna ad-deena inda Allahi al-Islam. And when the Quran continuously says that, the deen is single. The shara'i or the sharia is very much variable. As the Quran says, لِكُلٍّ مِّنْكُمْ جَعَلْنَا شِرْعَةً وَمِنْهَاجًا. For every group of people, for every nation, every tribe, every person that has come from the dawn of mankind till the time of the final prophet, we have given them a type of path. We have then given them a sharia. But when it talks about deen, it never ever uses adyan. And this is very important because we have the idea of pluralism. We have the idea that all religions can be true. The idea that Christianity is true, Judaism is true, it's very popular nowadays. But when the Quran speaks about Islam, it speaks about a truth which is universal and singular and unchanging. Similarly, like it says about Ibrahim, فَأَقِمْ وَجْهَكَ لِلدِّينِ حَنِيفًا. Turn your face towards that deen of Hanif. Then it speaks about in another verse, and deen Hanif means that same religion which Ibrahim alayhi salam had is the same religion of the Prophet. Then it speaks in another verse that who called you Muslims? Who gave you that name Muslim? Because the Quran is saying, hang on, I'm not coming with something absolutely new here. I am affirming what came before me. Because I am affirming the values which were given to you from the first prophets and the earliest prophets right upon this final prophet. And then it says, Millata Abikum Ibrahim huwa sammakum muslimin. The millah, the nation of your father, the father of our nation, here according even to the Prophet, the Quran is addressing the Prophet and saying the father of your nation is Ibrahim, who has actually named you as Muslims. So this is one aspect of the Quran where we say that it is a universal document, it's a universal constitution for human beings to live their lives. And unfortunately, sometimes we look at subcultures that are created within our communities, within our religious thinking as a whole, which does not give the Quran the centrality it deserves. Now, why do I say that? Because you ask anyone, Shi'i, Sunni, anybody about the Quran, and everybody agrees on the Quran. We use it in our everyday language. We use it in our everyday expressions. And no person would deny it. But I'm talking about actually creating a culture, an environment, an ambience which is Quranic, where the Quran is at the very center of how we think about religion. And this is one of the biggest disasters that has occurred within the Muslim world, due to various reasons, is that the Quran has almost become subservient, i.e. a servant or under the Hadith. And here's the big difference here. The Quran is revelation. It's not hundreds and thousands, in fact millions and billions of people from the time of the Prophet until now could not concur on something which is potentially going to change or which is corrupted. The fact that the very same text has been confirmed century after century amongst so many parallel generations affirms that this is something which is exactly the way it was revealed to the Prophet, right? Can we say that about the Hadith? Because the Quran, the word, in fact, it says qira'ah, it's from the word to read. It's something which is read. And we're talking generation after generation, and of course we can actually say that some of the greatest people who transmitted the Quran, the earliest people, Hafs and Asim, these readings of the Quran were Shia of Ahlul Bayt, were followers of Ahlul Bayt. They were actually taught by Imam Ali alayhi salam. So some of the I'm not getting into the nitty-gritty of that, although we can speak about that at another time about the transmission of the Quran. It's very interesting. But the Quran, in that sense, is totally unadulterated. There is no change in it. There's not a single letter increased or reduced. There is, of course, differences, slight differences, where they talk about whether, according to chronology of the Quran, potentially, and other aspects. But when it comes to the words of the Quran and the ayat and the surahs, there is absolutely no change. But when it comes to the hadith literature, here the problems arise, the bigger problems. Because we know the hadith was compiled many years into the 2nd and the 3rd century after the Prophet. And the hadith literature has been fraught with so many pitfalls and so many dangers. Why? Because we know that Islam, that straight after, of course, the 4 caliphs according to the Sunni Islam, and according to us, of course, we have our own version. We have despots ruling the Muslim world. Not necessarily sincere Muslims but more hypocrites. The Umayyad dynasty, Banu Umayyah, the Abbasides. These were people who were very much interested in power and conserving their power by any means possible, which including making religion subservient and adapted to their power. A lot of hadith was actually fabricated for power reasons, for political reasons, for theological reasons, to prove a certain type of theology, where there was something to say that God does not intervene in anything, in the sense that it's all fate. Human beings have no choice, it's all the fate of God. Whatever happens, whether it's a despotic ruler or not, that ruler is chosen in a way, just fulfilling the will of God. Then there were other hadith that were fabricated to raise people's statuses. As we know, for example, we have a hadith which relates to Imam Ali alayhi salam being the door to the city of knowledge. But then there was a hadith which suddenly appears which talks about other individuals being the roof, and another individual being the wall, and another even being the foundation. So these are constructed memories according to partisans who construct and back project these ideas onto the life of the Prophet and the life of the companions, just to make their viewpoint look better and rosier. And we see this, that within even various individuals, various companions of the Prophet, when Islam expanded and it reached a stage where a lot of wealth was coming into the religion, especially at the time of the third caliph, there was so much money pouring in from the frontiers of the Muslim world that many very, very poor Sahaba became extremely rich. We're talking about they become, in today's context, multimillionaires. And all that wealth meant they suddenly had to cough up the goods to the powers that were giving them the wealth. And that led to a huge amount of hadith being fabricated. Then we look at also geographical locations. In Kufa and when things went away from Medina, and remember a lot of the Ahlul Bayt lived in Medina. I know Imam Ali moved to Kufa, which was already set up as a Muslim town. We find that there were other groups there. There were groups of people who were influenced by Christian monasticism, by Christianity, by Gnostic ideas of like superficial sort of peripheral groups who believed in like there's one force for evil and there's one force for this. There were other groups who were influenced by certain heretical ideas of Judaism, heretical ideas of Christianity. Now they became Muslim. They brought their ideas into the Muslim world. We have this idea called Israeliyat. Israeliyat are ideas which are taken from Judaic scriptures and from Christian scriptures, but then they're put into hadith literature, and those ideas are then used within, they were promoted and given into the hadith literature, and they were then made mainstream. Then you have another group of people, the Ghulat. I don't know whether you've heard of them. These are very extreme people who in fact even befriended and claimed to be companions of the Imams. And these individuals made some very, very sensational claims regarding the Imams, right? They made some extremely sensational claims, almost making the Imam divine people, almost like gods, saying that the Imams created the world. The Imam gives you food. He sends the rizq down, the Imam gives you the rizq. The Imam creates the child in the womb of the mother. The Imam signals the end of the world. The Imam, so to a certain extent, they were saying all these things which was so sensational, where the Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam had to speak to some of them. He had to actually say that I have nothing to do with these people. Like Abu Khattab was one individual who led a group called the Khattabiyah. He claimed so many things on behalf of the Imam which were totally untrue. But then these ideas slowly took currency. They started building and building and building, and they reached a level where they became almost mainstream ideas, where we think, wow, that's just a mainstream idea. Whereas if we go back to the earliest sources, we find that there is this a bit of a difference there, because when we look at how the Imams speak, do you think the Imams would boast? Do you think the Prophet ever boasted about anything when the Prophet, the Quran says the greatest accolade of the Prophet is his ubudiyyah, is his worship of Allah, is the fact that he is an abd. سبحان الذي أسرى بعبده ليلا من المسجد الحرام إلى المسجد الأقصى. Right? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that Subhan alladhi, that Subhan to that Lord, that who made the Prophet his abd journey to the furthest mosque. So here we can say that the ideas of that percolated the Muslim world throughout history, have some of them have caused more problems for the Muslims than anything else, especially in the hadith literature. But remember, hadith literature is not something you just throw the baby with the bathwater. You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? It means you must be very, very careful when quoting hadith. You must be very, very careful when trying to take every hadith for face value. When we say the Quran is universal, it speaks to every context. Every context. Anyone who reads the verse of the Quran can understand it and take something from it in the context. But whereas with the hadith, you lose some of the context. You've lost the qara'in, diya'ul qara'in we call it. You have lost the contextual indicators. What if somebody came to an imam, he was extremely angry, he had some family problem, or he was very much somebody with a psychological issue, an emotional issue? How do you speak to different people in society, right? So for example, you're in society and you have an individual, a family member, anyone who has issues with anxiety, with social problems, etc. You're going to speak to them in a certain way. There's a context. Here again, we find that so many people came to the Imam with their different problems, human beings. They all have a mixture of problems and a mixture of dispositions and personalities. They're coming to the Imam and saying things, but that context is not with you. That context is not with you when you're reading the hadith. That's another aspect of it. And there are even hadith that are attributed to the Imams, which say God is a body, God has hands, God has limbs. Of course, according when we read the authentic, sublime sayings of Imam Ali alayhi salam, when they, for example, he's asked, Hal ra'ayta rabbaka, and the Imam says, I have seen my Lord, but he says not with my eyes. He says, Bal ra'aytuhu bihaqa'iq al-iman. I've seen him with the insight and the realities of the heart. And when you read Dua Kumail, when you read Dua Sabad, when you read Dua Abu Hamda Thumali, when you read these beautiful du'as that are being taught by the Imams, you read Sahifatu Sajjadiyya, you read all these works, very, very Nahjul Balagha. You read all these works, you can suddenly, when you keep reading and reading the words of the Imams, as they say, Kalamul Muluk, Muluk al-Kalam, that the words of kings, are the masters, are the kings of words, or the best of words, and especially the Imams' words. When you continuously read the words of the Imams, Nahjul Balagha and Sahifatu Sajjadiyya, you'll suddenly become acquainted with the tongue of the Imam. You'll suddenly become acquainted with how an Imam speaks. His love for Allah, his love for humanity, his dedication to virtues, morals, ethics. When you read these words, you start to get this inkling. For example, you have a friend, a beloved, anybody, you keep hearing their voice, their words, and you live with them all your life. And then you become so used to their manner of speech. You become so used to the way the individual addresses things, sees the world view they have, the questions we were talking about, the world view, the view that the reality is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do you think an Imam would boast? Do you think an Imam would say that I am the creator of the world and I create the heavens and the earth and give you rizq and create your children and I do this and I do judgment day and I do that? Did the Prophet say any of this? Who has the greatest and the closest reality to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? No. So here we have to understand that the centrality and the most pivotal role within our lives should be the Quran. And as we see in Siffin, at the heat of the battle, the enemy, the side of Muawiyah, his forces led by Amr ibn al-As, they raised the Quran on spears. And it's the heat of the battle, and in fact, the Imam's forces are winning, and they have the upper hand. And suddenly, the individual raises the Quran. Amr ibn al-As says to all his army to reduce the morale of Ali ibn Abi Talib's followers, who are dedicated to the Quran, who are lovers of the Quran, raise the Quran on spears. The Quran is raised on spears. Battle of Siffin. What happens then is the warriors on the side of Imam Ali suddenly stop fighting. The Imam beckons them to go and fight. They say, "Oh Imam, the Quran has been raised. It's raised as an arbitrator. It's arbitrating between us now. We cannot continue fighting." The Imam says, "Kalimatul haq yuradu biha." Something very, very important. He says, it's a word of truth. Indeed, the Quran is haq, but what is meant by it is batil. Now, how many times in our daily lives we attach the word of the Quran to so many batil things? There's so many un-Islamic practices at weddings and here and everywhere. We have the Quran lofted. There's so many other things where there's no real idea that there's God involved. And we, when the Quran says if there's 2 people, the 3rd is God. There's 3 people, the 4th is God. If there's 5 people, the 6th is God. Right? We never, but we somehow remove the guilt by just mentioning the word of God, or to think that we're doing something godly just by putting the Quran on our head, or having it on a shelf. Or even if we go a level further, we do some act which is disappointing to the Ahlul Bayt. We do things which are not befitting a believer. I'm talking about even religious acts, which we may call religious. They do not befit, as the Imam Ja'far Sadiq alayhi salam says, "Kunu zaynan lana wa la takunu shaynan alayna," that be something, an ornament for us, be beautifying for us. Do not be something which makes us look ugly. Do not be something which makes us disappointed in you and make the school of Ahlul Bayt look like it is a total farce. Here, so we can't, just by attaching the name, we talk about Nisbah lil Hussein alayhi salam. Oh, it is related to Imam Hussein, so it must be good. There are so many things that we do in the name of Hussein, which I believe Hussein alayhi salam would not even endorse. We need to look at them ourselves. There don't need to be any examples of anything. But this is what Imam Ali says, that he says that kalimatun haqq yuradu biha al-batil, that it is a very, very true statement. The Quran is haqq, no doubt, but the meaning here is batil, so continue fighting. And then he says something very interesting, and I want to wrap up because I'm not even getting into the depths of this, is that the Imam says that anal Quranun natiq, that I am the speaking Quran. And here this goes to show the role of the Prophet and the Imams. When somebody was asked about how was the Prophet's character, he said, Kana khuluquhu al-Quran, that the character of the Prophet was the Quran. This is a big lesson for us, that we must make our character like the character of the Quran. The Quran which speaks about justice. The Quran that speaks about social reform. The Quran that speaks about piety. He says, the person, the Kadhimin al-Ghayz, the people who control their anger. What it says, khudil af, take pardon. When it says that even if a person is evil, idfa' billati hiya ahsan, that anyone is evil to you, swears at you, says anything to you, repel that badness with goodness. That person will become a bosom friend of yours. It says, wa'arid anil jahilin, stay away from the jahilin. As Luqman says in the Quran, that says, don't raise your voices and like the braying of a donkey. To walk on the earth with humbleness. All these things the Quran says, like it says that, oh Arabs, you're all warring, hating each other, fighting over petty things, over women and this and that, and we joined your hearts and made you united. The Quran speaks about, Inna ja'alna wa kadhalika ja'alnakum ummatan wasata. We made you a middle way ummah. We made you a ummah that follows the middle path. All of these aspects of the Quran, as the whole of the Quran represents the world outside, the wujud of the world. Like wujud, when we say it has so many levels, so many layers, so many manifestations, right? The world is so multiple. Look at it, you can see so much variety, color and smells. Similarly, the Quran just reflects all of that. And for you, it is to reflect that beauty of the Quran, to reflect the beauty of God, which came and clothed itself in words, in a way that you manifest the beauty of God in your flesh. And that is the virtuous body of the Iman. The Iman is actually a pure manifestation of all those divine names. Why? You look in the Quran, after every verse there is Rahman, Rahim, Khabir, Alim, Hakim. You know, all these different words. If you look at every verse of the Quran, it ends with a divine name. It ends with the names of Allah. They are one of the most commonplace features of the Quran. The names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What it is saying that these are all manifesting in the world. The manifesting in the book of Allah, then that is a book. What about a human being who has been given the highest station in out of all creation? What can he manifest? All the divine names can manifest in a human being. And that is when the Imam says, Ana Qur'anun natiq, that I am the Quran natiq. I am the speaking Quran, in the sense that he represents all the goodness and the beauty and the values of the Quran. And that basically means reaching the peak of humanity. That is what the Imam represents, and that is what the Imam is there for, and we will speak about that on the next 2 lectures. Talking of the Quran and truth and values, we see that the army of Yazid and all these individuals who fought against Imam Hussein claim to be followers of the Quran. We know that even on the day of Ashura, they were reciting the Quran. We know that even at the time when the martyrs of Karbala were paraded in Syria, and the women folk were taken as prisoners and they were paraded there. And in Kufa, what does Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad say? What has God done to you? They was trying to still invoke the name of God and religiosity, a fake religiosity, a hypocrisy, a fickle, superficial religiosity, not one which has penetrated their souls and made them good human beings, but rather it was just there as an outward form of Islam, just the skin of it. They were claiming that they follow the Quran, and they're saying, look, God has done this to you, we have not done this. So in this regard, we see on the night of Ashura, the tent of Imam Hussein alayhi salam was seen as a place that was humming like bees was there. The recitation of the Quran was on the lips of every companion. And out of the companions of Imam Hussein, there was a certain companion, a childhood friend of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And that childhood friend was none other than an individual who had served Ali ibn Abi Talib, who had served Hassan al-Mujtaba, and now he finds himself at the service of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. He was a childhood friend who had lived in Kufa, and his name was Habib ibn Mudahir. Habib ibn Mudahir was actually in Kufa. He was one of those people who had actually written letters to the Imam to come to Kufa. He had been in Kufa when Imam Ali would have his seat of caliphate. He had seen Al-Hassan, he had seen Al-Hussein, he had grown up with them, he had seen these great princes of humanity, and he had seen Lady Zainab. He had seen all of these beloved children of Imam Ali in Kufa when he was at the height of his power. A letter is sent to, on the night, or just at the evening or prior to Ashura on the 7th, and it is sent to Kufa, to Habib ibn Mudahir. The letter is received and it says, Min Hussein ibn Ali ila rajulun faqih. It says, from Hussein ibn Ali to a man endowed with wisdom and knowledge. Look how Imam addresses his companions. And As Habib began to read that letter, tears started to fall from his eyes. It says that your master Hussein is in Karbala. He is surrounded by the enemies who are thirsty for his blood. And his women folk are with him and his children are with him. And your brother Hussein asks for your help to come to Karbala. Habib's wife hears this and she says, what are you waiting for? The son of the messenger of Allah is in such a state and you stay? Habib then prepares to leave, but he cannot leave because the whole of the city is under siege. He asks his slave to prepare a steed, a horse, outside one of the farms, the stables of the city, and he will meet him at night. Much time passes. The horse and the slave are there, and the slave apparently has a conversation and says that your master is not coming. By God, if your master does not come, I will mount you and ride to defend the son of the daughter of the messenger of Allah. Habib makes it. He mounts the horse and says to his slave, you are free. You are free to leave. The slave says, how can I leave when Hussein ibn Ali, the son of Ali and Fatima, is in such a state? Do you think I will leave? I want to go there and also sacrifice myself for Hussein. They reach Karbala. Hussein sees this horseman coming and he sees it is Habib and a smile comes on his face. He sees my childhood friend is Habib, is here. But when Habib arrives, he embraces Imam al-Hussein and kisses him. And then he says that I send my salam to you. And then a messenger comes, Fidwa comes with a message saying that Lady Zainab sends a salam to Habib. Habib starts to weep and he throws his turban and he slaps his cheeks and he says, is this the state of the household of the Messenger of Allah? That at one time I saw you in Kufa, that you were teaching the Quran and you were the princess of Kufa and you had your brothers and your father with you, and now you are in here in around surrounded by these enemies, these bloodthirsty, inhumane barbarians. Woe be upon you, Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad. Woe be upon you, Umar ibn Sa'ad. Habib, then the days go by. It's the day of Ashura. Habib asks his brother Hussein ibn Ali and his childhood friend to bid him farewell. He goes and fights a brilliant battle. He is martyred. Hussein comes to his body. He weeps over his childhood friend, like he weeps over each one. Imagine this, Hussein. There will be a point where there will be nobody to help you. There will be no companions. You will cry out and say, where are my lions? Where is my Habib? Where is my Muslim bin Awsaja? Where are all of you? There will be a time when Hussein ibn Ali will be all alone on the plains of Karbala. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un.
Ya Hussein. Ya Hussein. Ya Hussein. Ya Hussein, 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 Ya Hussein.
Ya Hussein, 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 Ya Hussein.
हमने डूबा हुआ करबल का मुसाफिर देखा, हमने डूबा हुआ करबल का मुसाफिर देखा, हमने डूबा हुआ करबल का मुसाफिर देखा, हमने डूबा हुआ का मुसाफिर देखा, हमने डूबा हुआ करबल 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 का मुसाफिर ने देखा, हमने डूबा हुआ करबल का मुसाफिर देखा। रोते शबीर को ज़ारा की लहद पर देखा, हमने डूबा हुआ करबल का मुसाफिर देखा, हमने डूबा हुआ रोते शबीर को ज़ारा की लहद पर देखा, हमने डूबा हुआ करबल का मुसाफिर देखा, हमने डूबा हुआ करबल का मुसाफिर देखा, हमने डूबा हुआ करबल का मुसाफिर देखा। अपना सर मार के दीवार से रोया गाजी, अपना सर मार के दीवार से रोया गाजी, जब नबी ज़ादी को दे हुए बाहर देखा, हमने डूबा हुआ करबल का मुसाफिर देखा, हमने डूबा हुआ करबल का मुसाफिर देखा, हमने डूबा हुआ करबल का मुसाफिर देखा। अपना सर मार के दीवार से रोया गाजी, अपना सर मार के दीवार से रोया गाजी, जब नबी ज़ादी को आते हुए बाहर देखा, हमने डूबा हुआ करबल का मुसाफिर देखा, हमने डूबा हुआ करबल का मुसाफिर देखा, हमने डूबा हुआ करबल का मुसाफिर देखा। नूरियों को का गया कातिलों से पूछे हुसैन, नूरियों को का गया कातिलों से पूछे हुसैन, कोई बदला दे किसी ने मेरा अकबर देखा, हमने डूबा हुआ करबल का मुसाफिर देखा, हमने डूबा हुआ करबल का मुसाफिर देखा, हमने डूबा हुआ करबल का मुसाफिर देखा। रोते शबीर को ज़ारा की लहद पर देखा, हमने डूबा हुआ کربل کا مسافر دیکھا ہم نے ڈوبا ہوا کربل کا مسافر دیکھا ہم نے ڈوبا ہوا کربل کا مسافر دیکھا دور تک پھیلی ہے قاسم کی جوانی رن میں دور تک پھیلی ہے قاسم کی جوانی رن میں دیر تک ڈھونڈتا پھر سے پیغمبر دیکھا ہم نے ڈوبا ہوا کربل کا مسافر دیکھا ہم نے ڈوبا ہوا کربل کا مسافر دیکھا ہم نے ڈوبا ہوا کربل کا مسافر دیکھا اپنا سر مار کے دیوار سے رویا غازی اپنا سر مار کے دیوار سے رویا غازی جب نبی دادی کو آتے ہوئے باہر دیکھا ہم نے ڈوبا ہوا کربل کا مسافر
محمد وآل محمد صلوات
محمد وآل
توجہ زیارت
السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء السلام عليك يا هدية الكبرى السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله الحسين السلام عليك يا علي بن الحسين السلام عليك يا موسى بن جعفر السلام عليك يا جعفر بن محمد السلام عليك يا موسى بن جعفر السلام عليك يا علي بن موسى السلام عليك يا محمد بن علي السلام عليك يا علي بن محمد السلام عليك يا حسن بن علي السلام عليك يا حجة القائم المنتظر المهدي السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته صلوا
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
اللهم كل وليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه
في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين
اللهم صل